Donovan Rypkema. He is truly one of, we joke, the rock stars of historic preservation. He's the principal at PlaceEconomics, which is a real estate development and economic development consulting firm. He works at the nexus of where historic preservation meets economics. And that is really exciting and really interesting. He's done some of the most important work in historic preservation. He's worked in 49 states, several countries, for public, private, government, all sorts of communities and institutions. He was awarded the highest award in historic preservation, which is the Louise DuPont Crown Shield Award in historic preservation. So we are so lucky to have him here. We've talked about Donovan and bringing him in for years. In fact, I first heard him speak at the Urban Land Institute in 1995. I was 9. But he was talking about quantifying what I really understood and loved about historic preservation, that it's more than just these really cool neighborhoods and these really special places. When we're advocating for them, we need to be able to say, it's more than just a really cool place that we should save. We need some actual numbers behind it. And Donovan has really put forward and helped us understand through his many economic studies of this makes economic sense. And for some people, that is really the bottom line. This makes economic sense. It's also a cool place we want to be in, but it makes sense to find ways to protect and preserve them. So we're so lucky he came here to St. Pete. We've spent a tremendous amount of time raising the funds to be able to bring him here to conduct the study, and I think the study really will help us in the future to keep St. Pete special. We'll now have, numbers behind, again, what we all know. So we're so excited and so thankful to have him here, and welcome, thank you.
Who that handsome guy is. Thanks, Emily. That was a very nice introduction, mostly untrue, but appreciated. Thank you all for being here, and we really enjoyed, my colleagues and I who came down here, and then some who worked on the study who didn't come here. We really learned to love St. Pete, and a much more nuanced understanding about why you all came here and what you live about it, and this historic resources are really central to that. So I want to talk about something. I don't know. I have to turn the thing on. Talk about what it is. And so now the study is released and it's available on Preserve the Burg's website. So download it and read all the geeky footnotes and explanations of it all. But I want to just hit the highlights this morning. So the study really looked at 4 different things. It looked at the impact of local designation on property values. Now, you all know this, but just to put it in context, National Register districts are nice, and they kind of honorary thing, and they give access to federal tax credits of the commercial property, but there's no protection. Zero, zip, zilch, nada, no protection from being on the National Register. The only way that historic properties are protected is if they are in local districts, and so we looked at the impact of this local districting on property values. And again, the reason that's important, not so much that there's this preservation premium that I'll talk about, but for years, there's been this concern, hey, if you have a local district, it means another layer of regulation. Now you gotta go through some board to be able to, tear down the garage or whatever, and that prima facie means it's adversely affecting my property values. Well, it's in fact the other way around, and I'll talk about that. Then we looked at Central Avenue, because it was seen, and I remember our first conversation with Manny saying, we got this Central Avenue, it's this great, cool place everybody loves, but it's just kind of sitting there and risk of great change. So Central Avenue was what we looked at. We looked at the issue of the role of simply older housing stock, and we defined that as built prior to 1970, so 50 years plus age house. Whether or not it's designated historic, whether or not it even ought to be designated historic, just the role that older stuff plays in providing affordable housing in St. Pete. And again, affordable housing is a major issue here, and what's the role of older stuff. And then we did a community survey, and I'll talk more about that. But we don't do surveys in every one of our studies. We do it in some. And when you first started talking with Manny and board members here at Preserve the Burg, what ought to be included, we kind of talked about that, and Manny said, oh yeah, we got a great mailing list and we can do that. And I said, well, they can be part of it. Your mailing list can be part of it, but there's no statistical credibility. If it's only preservationists who say we love preservation, nobody's going to believe it. And I'll talk about the organization in a bit. So Manny really did a stellar job of arm twisting, baying, pleading, paying. I don't know how he got the people, but really a broad base of contact lists, so we could spread and really have what we now feel statistically is really both robust and reliable set of data. So those are the large areas, and I'll talk about the study as I go through. But starting out with the basics. So here you have the population and the land area of St. Pete. Is that the half of 1% of the land area of St. Petersburg is in local historic districts. Little shade over that is the population. Larger, 2.5% in National Register districts, and on the map, the dark teal areas are local districts, and then the hatched areas are National Register districts. I have to tell you, and this is not judgmental, I'm just telling you, we've done, 15 or 16 of these city level impact studies. Big cities, Los Angeles, New York, San Antonio, Phoenix, kind of mid-sized, Indianapolis and Raleigh and Miami-Dade County, and then little places, Saratoga Springs and Cumberland, Maryland. We just finished one in Columbia, South Carolina. We did Frankfurt, Kentucky, so lots of different scales. By far, St. Petersburg has the smallest area of land protected by local districts than any city we've looked at, by orders of magnitude. And it's not that you don't have the historic resources. Clearly that exists, and the sheer fact that 5 times as much area is in National Register districts where that historic threshold has been met. Not a criticism, I'm just telling you this is an extraordinarily low share of the city that's under protections of this local historic commission. One of the critiques, especially in growing places and places that have housing issues, is, well, density. We got to have density. If we're going to grow, we got to have density, blah, blah, blah. And you do. You need density. But the issue is often, and your stupid historic districts are keeping density from happening. So we got to weaken those and get rid of those so we can have density. Well, in fact, this consistent finding both in St. Pete and in the other place we've looked, in fact, there's as much density in the historic districts as there is in the rest of the residentially zoned land in the city. Meaning there's ways to achieve density without having to just be high-rise. And importantly, the density that's provided in historic districts is density at a human scale. And that's something we ought to celebrate. So forget gargoyles and porches. In fact, there's these contributions that preservation makes beyond, and density, in fact, is one of those. And then the issue about property values. And again, this is a finding that's potentially a double-edged sword. But again, the reason to include these in these studies is lots of times our firm sees ourselves as the myth breakers. And this idea, well, our stupid historic districts, more regulation, therefore lower property values, in fact, is not the case at all. So we looked over this 15-year period at the change in values of single-family properties in historic districts, local historic districts, versus the city as a whole. And what happened is that the value increased over time greater in the historic districts, counter to the kind of conventional wisdom, greater than the rest of the city. We also looked at multifamily residential properties, and the same was true. In fact, there was a greater rate of growth in multifamily than the rest of these small units, the rest of the issue. And one of the things that's often under-recognized in historic districts is because when they were built, they were usually built with a variety of building typologies. So there's single-family residence, but there's duplexes, and there's quadplexes, little 8-unit stuff. Those add both density and affordability. And you've got a whole bunch of, one of my heartbreaking stories was a fabulous, 1920s, 1930s residential property that was across from the shuffleboard court it was boarded up, but was still existing. It's gone now. Well, that ought to be the core of the affordable housing response, not, oh, we got to take this to the landfill. And it's rewarded in that pattern. What's interesting here, however, is contrary to the conventional wisdom that's often spouted, is the people who responded to the survey, in fact, understood this. One of the questions we asked was this kind of a statement that you then strongly agree with, strongly disagree, wherever, and one of those statements was historic district designation decreases property values. Well, so you have 60% who disagree with that, who kind of know that's simply not the case. So at least the people, the citizens, recognize that that's kind of a myth, that somehow it hurts property values. And then Central Avenue. And Central Avenue is just, it's this spine, but it just is so cool. And so that's when we mean Central Avenue, that's the area that we're talking about, and kind of those three general areas, the Edge and Central and Grand Central. And this again was a survey-based question. How often do you visit Central Avenue to shop, dine, or do business? Almost half the people do it once a week or more. That's incredible. So it's what makes it. And then another 35% once or twice a month. So it's a place that clearly broad use. And the cool part, where it has really distinctive flavors as you drive up Central, is that there's different kind of demographic cohorts who probably pick the share that they want, but in fact, in its whole, it has a very broad attraction. We looked at the age of the buildings on Central, and about 60% of them were built prior to 1960. So it is this concentration of older stuff, with a fifth of them built in the 20s. So it really does have this historic character. I will remind you, it's not an historic district. There's no protections there. It's just sitting there waiting for somebody to mow it down. And then also, it's a reason that both, I think, the character of the neighborhood and the age of the buildings and the price points, lots of reasons. But Central Avenue has 4% of all the businesses in St. Pete, but 8% of women-owned businesses and 7.5% of minority-owned businesses. So it has this attraction, different, a greater pattern than the city as a whole. Much of our work is in the geek talk is called revealed preference. Look what the marketplace is doing, and that they don't have to say, I want to be in that district. They evidence that by choosing to be. Well, here's particularly women and minorities making a revealed preference. They are preferring to be in that district for whatever reasons, for price, character, quality, whatever. That choice is being made by the marketplace. Here was another really interesting one, as we looked at both legacy businesses, so 20 years older, and about a toss-up in terms of the share that were really older businesses, but newer businesses created in the last 10 years. Again, in the city as a whole, the rest of St. Petersburg, 23% of businesses created in the last decade, but significantly more than that along Central Avenue. We recruited one of the Preserve the Burg board members to do some windshield survey, walking up and down the street and taking notes on it. And we looked at the occupancy level of older storefronts, and the considerably lower vacancy in the older buildings than in the new buildings. And again, lots of reasons for that, but two significant ones are character and price. Then we looked at what was happening in those both new buildings. And again, we're not against new buildings, it's just pointing out there's a big difference between the new stuff on Central Avenue and the old stuff on Central Avenue, where 99% of the businesses in the old buildings are local businesses. And I'm going to come back to that in the survey stuff, and half of that is true in the newer buildings. Restaurants, of course, 10%, 11% of the businesses along Central are restaurants, 3 times as much as the shares the rest of St. Petersburg. But again, that's one of those characters, quality of life amenities that generates pedestrian activity and liveliness and long. That means you're going from 6 in the morning till 2 in the morning. It means a long life of activity along Central. And then we ask these series of questions. When you visit Central Avenue, how important is each of these variables? And we had a whole list, and you could say it was very important, or somewhat important, or then not important, or very whatever. Top of the list, walkability. Not surprising. And people could check more than one. The next one was that attractive street fronts, a feeling of public safety, many locally owned businesses, diversity of businesses, a good retail mix, outdoor dining, so a whole bunch of things high on the list. And Manny pointed out when he had a call with some of you a week ago, is that historic preservation is there. Historic character still has over 60% saying it's a reason. But if this were kind of tilted, only preservationists answering the survey, we'd have preservation at the top of every list. And it's not. It's kind of mixed in there as one of those quality of character issues. Then we made comparisons about the job growth and looked at the job growth along Central versus the rest of St. Petersburg. So you take the increase in retail jobs, 67% compared to a minus 19% in the rest of the city. 129% increase in professional scientific, the kind of knowledge worker. 300% increase in accommodation and food services, not surprising, both hotels and restaurants. And then a 300% increase in information jobs, another one of those knowledge workers. Now, keep in mind, there's probably a small base. So you could go from 5 people to 15 people and have 200% increase, so don't overweight it. But the point is, in all of those characters, all of those areas that are both in the knowledge and kind of creative class business, the businesses are, with those employees, are choosing to be on Central Avenue disproportionately to how they're choosing to be in St. Petersburg as a whole. And then this issue about affordable housing. Of course, it's a critical issue in St. Pete. It's becoming a critical issue almost everything. And again, we had long talks, and we need to look at old stuff, and we had to get the concurrence of our client, but saying we're not just going to look at historic stuff or historically designated stuff, we're going to look at old stuff. What role does old stuff play in providing affordable housing? And here was our methodology, for those of you who are scientist geek types, is that we said we looked at the census block data. And census block is the lowest unit that the Census Bureau looks at, and census blocks are usually 5 or 6 city blocks, so it's a pretty neighborhood, proxy number. And we looked at those that over half of the housing stock in those areas was built prior to 1970, and those are the yellow areas. So there's this concentration of older housing. So then we could make comparisons, what's happening in those areas versus what's happening in the rest. As part of that, part of the survey part, we asked people to see, we had a list of 8 things that might be important to you. We asked people to rank which is most important, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Well, 16% that was affordable housing was their most important issue, 14% was their second, 17%. So you have half the people having in their top 3 things of importance, priorities of affordable housing. So it's an issue that's kind of resonating throughout the community. There is the housing share built by decade. So you have 24 plus 11, so 35 plus 30, you got 60% of the housing stock in those older areas built prior to 1960. So you have 60-year-old plus housing, again, disproportionate share to what was in the rest of the district in St. Pete. And here's, again, the interesting part, but also why this housing is so important, is that if we look at income brackets, those at the lowest end of the income bracket, there's 50% more, 18% versus 12% living in these older areas, and far fewer in the upper end living in the older areas. Here's the message here, and again, we don't make recommendations in these kind of impact studies. It is existing older housing that's meeting the housing needs of people of modest income in St. Pete, period. Number 2, for the vast majority of these, there's no protection whatsoever. Any one of them could be torn down tomorrow. Number 3, almost by definition, you tear down an older housing unit, you're tearing down a unit of affordable housing, period. If anybody's serious about addressing the affordable housing issue, you have to begin with keeping the old stuff we got, historic or not. You got to keep the old stuff. You're not making affordable housing when you're building units that are going to rent for $3,000 a month. That ain't it. And I don't mean that's bad. You got to market for $3,000 a month apartments, but that's not the solution to affordable housing. Solution, in part, is keeping the stuff that you got already, and there's no tool today to do that. We also looked at the tenure, meaning the owner-renter split. And in these older housing stuff, interestingly enough, almost 60% of it is owner occupied. So it's not just renters who are, facing needs. And we looked at the share of rents, and some of this you'll look in footnotes if you really care in the report itself. But again, the skew of more affordable units by rent in the older districts, and the same is true when you look at owner housing costs. It's skewed. They're more, now that once you see that, you say, well, duh, of course that's true. But instead, it needs not just to be recognized kind of in the back of your head, but converted into some of them policy things if we're going to address affordable housing. There's in kind of housing economics, there's this concept of housing cost burden. If a household spends more than 30% of their income on housing, they're considered to be housing cost burden. Well, it's not that the older housing is solving all the needs. Is that a quarter of the owners and 60% of the renters, in fact, even though they live in that older housing, are housing cost burden. So we can't. It's too much, and we can't make that better by tearing that stuff down. This is a really geeky graph, but each of those dots is a census block in St. Pete. And the horizontal line is the year the housing was built. The vertical is the household income there. And what you see is that there's a concentration in that bottom left-hand corner. That is older housing stock, more modest income. That's in fact where it's happening. And then this was maybe the most surprising of the data is the survey. We did a survey, and we're very disciplined about we don't do the political kind of things. Don't you think that Senator X is the most wonderful thing that ever happened to Florida kind of question, agree, disagree, whatever. No, we were very disciplined about writing balanced questions so we get balanced answers for we get it. And again, I mentioned it before, but part of the reason that we put statistical credibility in the results is all of the organizations that Manny contacted to spread the link. It was an online survey, spread the link so it's a broad representation. So the city of St. Petersburg and their neighborhood development, the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Partnership, the Historic Old North Neighborhood Association, so you can see them all. So all of these put spread out the link to the survey, and so we got a broad range of responses. First question was, why do you live in St. Petersburg? And you can check more than one. The top choice, 3/4 of the people, the character and sense of place of St. Petersburg. And then the second one, 70%, good lifestyle amenities. And then the next one, arts and cultural environment, and the natural beauty. Well, think about that. Think about all of those are ephemeral kinds of things. You really can't touch those things, but that's what's drawing the people here. Meaning that those less physical things are always fragile. They're always at risk. And then in thinking about St. Petersburg, how important are the following to you personally? Parks and public spaces, 85% important, another 13% somewhat important. And then safety, and then arts and cultural, then historic character. And once again, if we'd have just had only preservation as answering the question, but no, it's kind of balanced view where historic preservation is important, but not the only thing that people care about. Then the city of St. Petersburg has set a high priority on sustainability. How important do you feel each of these followings is to a comprehensive sustainability effort? Top of the list was adaptive reuse of existing buildings with 3/4 of the people, and another 22%. So you have 98% putting that as the priority. You couldn't get 98% of the people in St. Petersburg to agree that the sun rises in the east, and yet that's the share that's saying that adaptive reuse. And in the footnote you'll see, and I know that Manny mentioned it in one of the conversations, is this was we sorted these number of these questions in different ways. This one we sorted about the people who didn't care about historic preservation, was not on their radar, they didn't care about that. Still overwhelmingly said the adaptive reuse of existing buildings was the top priority for sustainability. Then in infrastructure investment and so forth. And then again, we're not making judgments on anything, but we wrote questions to get honest answers. St. Petersburg has experienced significant change in its built environment in recent years. In general, how do you personally feel about the change? 40% said mostly negative. 23% said mostly positive. Again, we don't live here. I'm just telling you what you all have said, and beyond you. Tell us personally how you feel about the following statements. Historic preservation maintains St. Petersburg character and quality. Again, 90% agree with that. So take those two pieces. Why do you live here? Why do you come here? It's just quality of character. And then totally different question, what does historic preservation do? It preserves maintains the character and identity of the city. And then again, preservation makes St. Petersburg attractive to visitors and new residents, promotes economic vitality. And then please rank the following how important you think it is for the future of St. Petersburg. And there was a list, and you ranked them, this is most important, this is least important, whatever, and we sorted those all. Maintaining historic character, number one response. Number two was preserving the St. Pete vibe. And again, that's not an accident that those two are connected. And Central Avenue, of course, is kind of the graphic representation of that kind of St. Pete vibe and the connection. And then you've all taken surveys. This was one where you had a little button that you could move up and down the scale. And the scale at one end was St. Petersburg would be just as good a city without historic preservation. The midpoint was historic preservation neither adds nor detracts from the quality of St. Petersburg. The other end, St. Petersburg is a much better city because of historic preservation. Again, this is not a skewed question. You can put your button wherever you want. And there was the answers. That's what people in St. Petersburg said about the importance of historic preservation in St. Petersburg. What's that saying to me as an outsider is, wow, this stuff is really important here, but it's all fragile because so little of it has any protection whatsoever. In your opinion, which of the following would significantly reduce the quality of St. Petersburg? Diminish public safety, obviously important for all of us, especially when there's an older population. And next, loss of historic character. So you have this, the quality is a place of importance. Historic preservation is what adds significantly to that quality. We'd lose a lot if we lost it, meaning you need to do something. So thanks very much. I'm happy to take questions, comments, alternative views. Go back to Washington, you communist. Any of those are perfect. I would encourage particularly the geekiest of you to download the report and read the footnotes. And it'll give you a kind of sense of confidence of the report. Yeah.
Did you look at Sundial, the commercial where the multiplex theater is, and I think it has about 80% vacancy right now, and that it was thriving at one time, and now it's just.
Yeah, we didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, for developers, why does it seem like it's more attractive for them to knock down and rebuild than to restore? Is it a financing thing? Will the banks not loan as readily to preservation and renovation?
What's really interesting, and I'm not anti-real estate, I come from a real estate development background, so I'm not that. And it's this distinction between the amount of money I can make or the rate of money I can make. And what happens is I build a 40-story condo or whatever, I can make more money. Now, based on all the evidence, my probably rate of return is less, or certainly not significantly greater than had I done rehabilitation projects. But I think it's the magnitude. Now, there could be big buildings built. The issue is not to have it, it's just where they do. And I think that what we're seeing in parts of St. Petersburg, just in my observation, I don't have the data here, is we're seeing the construction of parasite buildings. That is buildings being built in places for the purpose of taking advantage of the character of the neighborhood in which they're being built, but are simultaneously destroying that character.
Yep.
So it is the golden egg thing. It is, and Central Avenue is a great example. That is the character. This is not an accident. It's a why they're going there. And yet every time one happens, one of those little places that makes the character disappears in exchange. So it's not that we shouldn't be building big stuff. We should. We're going to need to meet the market. But we shouldn't do it at the expense of the character.
What was the example you just cited? I couldn't hear.
Well, I didn't cite a specific example. I just said that the Central Avenue development along Central Avenue is diminishing the character of what they drew them to begin with. No. Yeah.
I came in a little late. Who commissioned your study and how can we leverage these results from our lovely city council?
Yeah, great. The Preserve the Burg was the client, and then somehow twisted arms enough to pay for it. And the study itself, the whole study is downloadable on the Preserve the Burg website. And you can, and we'll put it on ours as well. You can download it for free and use it as you see fit. So, and all of the, for those, for any, you know, the skeptic side and stuff, all of the methodologies and backgrounds and footnotes and caveats or whatever there. Yeah.
Another part of the answer to the last question is that developers know how to tear down and build new. And it is easy. There are lots of contractors. They don't know how to do historic restoration. And so a knowledge base and vendors are an important part of a historic city. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That, and again, this is not being critical of somebody whose development practice is building, you know, 20-story stuff. But it's absolutely right, is that I'm a developer, I say, I know how to do this. I don't know how to do that, so fix up old stuff, and so I'm going to avoid it. Now, and that's right. I have to say that honestly, that is not an unusual pattern. Is that around the country, the redevelopers of historic properties tend to be niche developers. They're this little kind of end of the bell curve thing that they want to do. Now they figured out how to do it to make money, but it does, and it's a knowledge and it's a patience and it's an understanding. Having said that, is that what's underutilized and under-recognized as a tool in lots of places, and I suspect in St. Petersburg, is the use of the federal rehabilitation tax credit. You know, if you can get 20% of the cost of the building picked up by tax credits, you can make some mistakes and make a difference. And so it's, but you're right. So you have to have mostly, and they're mostly, not all, mostly smaller scale developers who say my little niche is going to be taking these historic buildings and figuring out how to use them. Yes, yeah.
So it sounds like we need more local designated areas. Did we look at why we have such a low number of local designated areas and how we respond to that?
Yeah, and others with more local expertise than I have, but I will tell you my answer. You have the most bizarre, anti-democratic system of creating local districts that I've ever encountered. It's just mondo bizarro. And to have to say, oh well, there's lots of places in their ordinance that say we have to have a vote of the neighbors or whatever. Oh, yeah, I'm not against that. You don't have to do that for zoning, but if you have, fine. But then to have the process where anybody who doesn't vote is counted as a no, that's like Donald Trump or Joe Biden saying, no, I get elected because all the people who didn't vote would have voted for me. Well, nonsense. That is anti-democratic. You do have the vote, if you lose the vote, preservation, sorry, you lost the vote. But to have counted against, and then just exacerbated by the seasonality of lots of the residents and owners. So if I were the czar, I'd say, step one, we gotta change our damn ordinance on how local districts are created. And we're just leaving at risk all the historical resources that you have.
I thought your comment was interesting about what you call parasite buildings or parasite development. But I'm no expert in this, but I also feel as part of what makes the character are buildings from a variety of periods in a place. And you know, I can walk through any neighborhood and see a building that just got plopped in. It's like, wow, that just doesn't even like fit. And again, I'm not educated in this.
Yeah.
But then there are others that you're like, wow, you know, Central Avenue maybe is a good example. You walk along it, there's old, there's new, and that's what makes it. If it all looked MedRev, I mean, I like MedRev, but if it all looked like that, I don't think I'd like it as much.
Yeah. No, you are expert.
So how do you,
No, I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree with you, and that's why, again, one of the myths about historic preservation is, oh, you have this historic preservation thing, you can never make any change or do anything. That's just not true. I think that you're right. I think that there's a real value added of a variety of ages and styles and so forth. I think that really evident though is when there's a dramatic change in scale.
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's not, you know, we had a 2024 building, that could be great, but a 2024 building that's, you know, 30 stories high when everything else is true, I think that's what makes it really disruptive.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Do you ever have a chance to present your studies to actual municipalities and for the city council, for instance? And, I mean, I'm sure it's always well received by preservation organizations, but
Yeah.
how does it go if you present it to?
Usually, and I know that Manny made a good effort, it usually, when we do these city studies, about half of them are paid for by the local government, and the other half by the nonprofit preservation advocacy, about half and half. But nearly always we make presentations to city council, regardless of who paid.
And what's the have you studied the long-term effect, like once you're enlightened about your?
Well, I think it's not that we wove a wand and now entire city council are the biggest preservation advocates. But I think what it does, frankly, and the study, whether we present or not, what it does is lets people step back and make policy decisions that are based on evidence as opposed to emotion or conventional wisdom. I think that's the real value. And frankly, people are always, when we're not able to present to the city council, people are always apologetic and say, oh, I wish the mayor could have heard, I wish the city manager could have heard. But what I've learned over the time I've been doing this since forever, is that, you know, I'm not a local voter, they don't give a damn what I have to say. So that we really see that our role is more presenting ammunition to local advocates, so they have a basis to make the case individually to their council member or the mayor or whatever, than some stupid consultant from 300,000 miles away. So.
One more and that's.
Okay, one last one.
So then I'll double up my question. You know, to me, it's very obvious looking at the Vinoy, you know, and is looking at what's the quality of the environment we want, as opposed to the monstrosities or whatever you call those buildings, and that your points are so well taken in terms of historical preservation. 2 points. One is, about a couple of months ago, there was a city presentation, and one of the people from the city talked about the environmental impact, and that the city needs over $2 billion to restore, do stormwater maintenance management, and none of that funding, he said, was available. And so as we're looking at this in terms of historical quality, but is also in terms of the unknown impact of climate change, and also the very real and concrete issues that the city just simply does not have the infrastructure, does not plan it, is not interested in actually addressing the issue in any substantial way. So that is one point. And because of your broad experience and being the sage that you are, so if you had the fairy wand of being the wise sage that you are, what are 3 things that you would most want to do to bring this conversation into reality into St. Petersburg? And if you can answer those questions in 100 words or less.
So my answer is yes.
Thank you.
Well, I think, yeah, sure. It was that there's issues here about infrastructure capacity, there's environmental issues, there's climate change issues, and the city not having or not willing the resources to do it at just a whole level. And so the question was, could you just, given what you know and the your fact you're an old guy, can you just give us kind of what are the 3 things? I think that preservation success, and again, I think the Preserve the Burg's efforts in this study are great evidence their capacity to do so. I think that preservationists need to get people on board who are not preservationists. And I think that you're absolutely right, and I would say that kind of the environmental side, you cannot say that you are for saving the environment by saying the only thing we're going to do is build green gizmo buildings. No, you save the environment by keeping what's there now, historic or not. That has to be the central part of any kind of sustainability strategy. Number 2, I think that I'd make allies with the environmentalists to say, hey, you know about salamanders or something, but in fact, if we're going to do something about the environment, we got to save existing structures. Number 2, I think that you need to really wrap in the affordable housing advocates. historic or not, the old stuff is what's providing that. You can't be randomly tearing it down, and that's what's happening now. And then maybe the third point is to say, this is not about, you know, gargoyles and cornices. This is about economic development, and that historic preservation ought to be a key element of a comprehensive economic development strategy. So that, thank you all very much.